All right, let's go ahead and we're going to talk a little bit about the compete culture. So this really goes back to Jeff's question about where organizations would fall into. And I think that one of the cultures that would be very natural for a lot of businesses to fall into is this idea of compete. It's all about competition. It's all about that. And really what we're getting at is this idea that a culture is that seeks to enhance efficiency through competition by focusing on results, achievement, and market demand or market share. That's that compete culture. Now, it's a good thing, and I just want to share a few examples. There's no question that we run faster when we run with other people, right? When we run with somebody that's fast, we try harder to keep up with them. So in competition, we do move faster when we're working with others and when there's targets and when we're trying to move forward. It brings out this idea of high performance. Just last night, I was in a league basketball game, and I was amazed that some of my friends that I didn't know they had an athletic bone in their body were incredibly competitive, and they were just jumping and moving a lot faster than I'd ever seen them move because they were in this league. But on the other hand, another thing that I saw come out in that league, this competition, was animosity and frustration within a team. And so that's one of the challenges of competition is how do we bring this higher level of performance while reducing some of the challenges that we have with competition in terms of animosity and decreasing the collaborative culture that we're trying to create as well. So some of the ideas around the complexity behind competition, there really are 5 primary ways to implement a compete culture. The first one is maybe we're just looking about between employees. So an easy example of this is sales, right? We have 10 people that are in the sales team. We want a competition between all of them in order to hit, whoever has the highest targets gets, incentive X. That's one way that we can think about competition. Sadly, many leaders, that's the only way they think about competition, is that it's about between employees or between people. And I think that can become a narrow view for competition. A second one is goals-oriented. So this is another one of the more highly used ones, which is the idea that we succeed as a team or an organization. So, we're trying to hit a specific market share, or we're trying to, serve a certain number of customers in a given time period. Goals-oriented competition is more organizational focused, but sometimes it can be challenging because it doesn't get down to that individual level. And so higher performers can kind of carry the remainder of the organization. The third one that I think is less used but is really important is this idea of individual growth. So now I'm not competing with the organization or against other people. I'm competing with myself. And again, these are we can use all of these in different scenarios. But this would be a great one, especially with those personal management interviews, where we're trying to help somebody to grow and to be better. And so we're having them set a target for themselves and moving in that direction. And then the fourth one is about this market-centered competition. So it's about benchmarks. It's about how we compare to other people in the organization. And so we're about comparisons that way. And so, this is a great one if we're in a time where the economy may not dictate that we'll be able to grow in the way that we want to, but we still want to have this competition, this incentive. Well, let's see if we can maintain market share or move in market share. So it's not so much about the number of widgets that we've made each year. And then the last one when we think about the complexity of competition is about team-centered competition. So groups of people and teams that kind of compete together for a specific prize. And I think this can be a good one if you're trying to build that team unity, so 4 or 5 people, 10 people. When you have multiple teams, this can be a great way to help people to work together and, kind of still have that level of competition. And so when we think about what are we going to do to get this out here, we really have to think about what is the best competition for our employees. So you need to think about some of these questions, and I'm just going to throw them out there. The first one is, what motivates your employees? This is going to change. What motivates your employees today may not be what motivates them 5 years from now. So we need to be, constantly reevaluating what motivates our employees. And it's not going to be because incentives change. It might just be because the people change and people have different incentives, things that motivate them. The second one, what are the goals of the competition? One of the biggest challenges that I see is that people set out a competition because they want to increase performance. If that is the only goal, it's not enough. We need to be more specific. What are the specific areas of competition, or what are the specific goals of that increase that we're trying to hit? And then think about what kind of a competition would lend itself best to get there without doing damage or creating animosity. The third one is like, what tension will be created? So this idea of tension, animosity, it's going to be there. So what are some of the things that we can perceive are going to happen before we even introduce the competition? And then finally, is there anyone who will be disproportionately advantaged by the type of competition you choose? This is one of the ones that I use. I've worked with organizations that tried to have competitions across different departments. So you'd have an accounting department, you'd have a manufacturing, you'd have a sales, and they'd have this competition that was very clearly one-sided. So, thinking, just an easy example of thinking about revenue generation, right? Well, it's hard to do that when you've got these different concepts, or these different departments, because they all do different things. And so we need to think about, when we create a competition, are we disadvantaging some people? Or, for example, even if it's just within a sales team, if we select a competition that's going to disadvantage the director or the person that's got administrative responsibilities that can't go out and do as much as others. And we need to recognize that and acknowledge it, even if we don't fix it. That's just something to think about with competition. So ideas for enhancing that competition culture. The first one is identify your competitive approach. So, what are we going to do? Which one of those kind of 5 different ways of competition are we going to go about? What's our kind of plan? The second one is be intentional and creative about incentives, and use monetary incentives sparingly. I say this because, again, this is something that organizations just default to. Well, we'll give them extra money. But what's interesting is there was a study done on a nuclear waste facility in Rocky Flats, Colorado, and it's been 20-something years ago. But what's really interesting about this story is that they found that if, there were incentives that didn't change performance in this study, that if they wanted to actually change performance using money, it had to be life-changing almost. So, we're talking doubling their monthly salary or 1.5 times their monthly salary. That might not be in the cards for our organization. So what are some other incentives we could use? On the previous slide, we saw a microscope. One of the reasons that that's up there is because I've seen organizations that, they had a piece of equipment that they needed, but the one that they had was working. But then they created a group-wide incentive or a group-wide competition where if they all accomplished their goals, they got this new microscope. And so that can be something that we can do as a team, is think about what do we need as a team that's going to help us work better, but is also incentivizing us to accomplish our goals. And so we could do things like that to also increase, to have competition and be intentional. We also need to build a singular purpose and be clear about the desired outcome. If we're not doing that, then really we're having a competition for the sake of having a competition. And then finally, we need to look for areas of desired growth and implement competition strategies. So, if we really want to create this compete culture, we need to kind of be more intentional about it and think about it. And I would argue we need to include other people. Another course that I've taught with Canopy and in other organizations is about empowerment and how to empower people. And one of the things that we talk about is that, people really do support what they help create. And so if we've allowed people to identify areas of competition and identify areas where people are, where we're trying to improve, then they're more likely to engage in the competition. And so this right here is the 5 dimensions of empowerment, with meaning being that, they know why they're doing it. Self-efficacy, they feel like they can do it. Trust, they know that they can trust the organization. This is an actual goal and that we're going to incentive, that we're going to, follow through with our promises. Personal consequence, they feel like they have some stake in the game, that they're going to make a difference. And then the final one is self-determination, that they've had some choices and how the competition will be created. And so this is kind of a unique way to think about competition, to allow our people in our organization to be a part of that conversation. But if we want to create that competitive culture, these are some great ways to enact it. So here we go. We're going to talk about the control culture. So when we talk about control, I just want to, lay it on the line. A lot of times we can think of this in a negative light, because the idea of this is that it's a culture that seeks to focus on the importance of consistency, structure, coordination, and stability as the best way to increase organizational efficiency. But what a lot of you heard me say when I said that was bureaucracy, or you heard me say policy or regulation. And those have become, in a lot of ways, negative words in some of our culture and in some of our circles. Some of you are like, I love those words. But I think we just need to acknowledge that this idea of control is somewhat counter-cultural to the way a lot of our society is going. But the truth of the matter is, there are a lot of reasons that a control culture may be something that you desire. And it may be something your organization needs right now. Maybe not in a year or 10 years from now, but this is the kind of culture that we need right now, and we need to go there. And so what I want to acknowledge right here is that bureaucracy is not bad. But we do need to have intentional bureaucracy, right? We need to have intentional structure. Again, going back to the Rocky Flats case that I mentioned about this nuclear waste facility in Colorado. So what happened with this is that there was nuclear waste, and I don't know, some of you may actually remember this, and it was a big deal because they were storing the waste, and the FBI went in and shut it down like instantaneously. So imagine a forklift with nuclear waste on a pallet. FBI comes in and says, shut it off, and they leave the forklift there with nuclear waste in cans on the pallet. And they left it there for a long time. I want to say it was months to years, because they were investigating what they thought and found out was kind of inappropriate ways that they were disposing of the waste. But they had to leave it there. And so, of course, it created an even more dangerous place. And so the government, put out a bid for who could clean it up. And this company went in there and they were going to clean up Rocky Flats. And they came in and they did it in $6 billion under budget of what they thought it would take, and in almost a third of the time that they thought it would take to do it. And one of the things that was found in a study on this, and I think the name of the book is Making the Impossible Possible, and it's a book by Kim Cameron as well. One of the things that they found is that they had very intentional bureaucracy. They had very intentional places where, yes, you have to take care of the waste in this way, but bring your ideas on how we can get from point A to point B to your leader, to your manager. And they actually had a lot of innovative things that came out of this experience. And again, it comes back to intentional bureaucracy. How are we building the control and the structure that's going to best help our organization? And so I want to give you some ideas for how to develop a control culture. So the first one is create and solidify company policies and procedures. And when we talk about this, what Jeff just mentioned in the question of, hey, what if we don't follow through? That is even more critical in a control culture, right? If we create a policy and then we never use it, or it just kind of sits on the shelf, that's pretty bad, right? Because what we're waiting for is a lawsuit because we had a policy that we never actually followed. And so we need to, solidify the company policies and procedures that are critical to us. And we also need to know why they're there, and we need to articulate that. The second one is develop user-friendly manuals and tutorials for common organizational tasks. So a lot of times in organizations we'll have manuals, but they've kind of evolved over time. And so the same manual that we used to send faxes, 20 years ago, we've taken that and applied it to sending emails today. And so there's some things in there that might be true, but they don't really need to be in the manual. And so developing easy to follow, user-friendly manuals is another way to develop that control culture. And I think that this is especially important when you're dealing with tasks that do have a lot of consistency. So, for example, if your accounting firm or if your organization uses software, and there are specific ways that we in this firm use that software, we need to make sure that that's out there and that people have those user-friendly manuals so that we're all doing it in the same way. The third one is that we need to enhance our orientation programming for new employees. So when we onboard someone, this is the first and best place for us to be able to make a difference in how they see the organization and how they see us. And then we also need to utilize assessments of employee performance to ensure consistency. So we need to make sure that we have surveys and ways that we're going about acknowledging what's happening in our organization. And it needs to not just be something that helps us to determine where people are, but it also needs to be that thing that will help us to determine, what areas of improvement our employees have for their sake and also for ours as an organization. And then finally, you need to set clear strategic goals and follow through with planned practices. So, when we set up to create a policy, it needs to have a goal at the end, right? So for example, if one of our goals is customer satisfaction, and so one of our policies is, that whenever a customer has a complaint, that we either move it right up to the manager or that we are able to make specific decisions that kind of lead to them being okay with the challenge that they faced. Those need to be policies, and we need to set the clear strategic goal and then make the policy that follows it in order to be able to kind of come to that goal and to that conclusion. And that's really what we're trying to do in a control culture, is find ways to make sure that our goals are accomplished in the way that we want them to be accomplished.